With this video, I want to show you how to just help you figure out how you might want to weight your retirement deposits into a 401k. What I did is went to my 401k account and I looked at all the possible funds that I was allowed to put money into. And there were 35 funds listed in my account, and I didn't do all 35. I just chose 10 of those 35 because there were like 3 large cap funds, 3 international funds, 4 mid cap funds, and things like that. So I didn't need all of them. I just chose like one of each. And these are the tickers of those funds. I went to Yahoo's finance site and I downloaded the prices of those funds. And technically I should have also gotten the dividends, but I was in a hurry and dividends would take longer than I wanted to spend on this project. So I downloaded the prices and then I calculated the returns. So I took like the current month, subtracted the month from a year ago, and then my divisor was the month that I subtracted in the numerator. And I calculated the annual returns each year for about the past 13 years, although not all the funds had data back that far. And so you can see this fund in the past year generated a return of 35%, this one a return of 1.17%. Then way down here at the bottom, I calculated the arithmetic mean, just using the average function of all those annual returns for this particular fund, and then the standard deviation of that mean. And then ultimately I got this data for each of those 10 funds. Now this is of course historical data. It is not what will happen in the future, but I'm working under the presumption that these trends will continue. Ultimately, I decided not to do all 10 funds because although I have a spreadsheet that will do this for 10 funds, it's really messy and I just want to show you the process, so I'm going to show it for only 5 funds because it's a little easier to deal with. So I narrowed those 10 funds down to just 5. So I have the annual returns for those 10 funds for the past 13 years. I again calculated the arithmetic mean and standard deviation for those funds. I also need the correlation coefficients, and I've already calculated them, but I'll show you how I did them. So this set of information contains the annual return for my fund each year for the past 13 years. And you can see this particular fund doesn't have data for one of the years, but that's okay. So to calculate the correlations, I go to my data ribbon and I use data analysis and highlight the correlation function. I've already done this, so it's just pulling up the old data, but then I highlight my range of annual returns. I'm not highlighting my arithmetic mean or standard deviation. And I did highlight my tickers, so I have to turn on labels in the first row. And then for the output range, I'm going to tell it to put the output starting in cell H8. So it will put my matrix of correlations beginning in H8. So here are my correlation coefficients. And you can see some of them are quite highly correlated. This is, let's see, this is an international fund, and this is also an international fund. So they have quite high correlations. Actually, I think the DFFVX is a small cap fund. The fact that they have such high correlations is interesting. Now I have opened up a spreadsheet called The Final Frontier, and basically it has everything already programmed into it. And all you have to do is paste your correlations. Now, these aren't the same funds. This is a spreadsheet that I did about a year ago. So I'm just going to replace this area with my correlation coefficients. So I'm popping over to the ones I just calculated. I'm going to highlight that matrix and copy it, paste it into my Final Frontier spreadsheet, and it's redrawing all this information, recalculating. Right now it's not able to find the information that it needs, so I will correct that in a moment. So now I'm going to just paste these tickers here to replace my old tickers. And I'm going to pull in the annual arithmetic mean and standard deviations for those funds from this spreadsheet. So here are my arithmetic means, and the standard deviations are right below, so I'll just highlight both of those at once. Pop over to my Final Frontier, and I'm going to go paste special or paste values. So I'll paste the actual numbers from my spreadsheet. So now all of this information is the information for my 401k funds. Now, interestingly enough, whenever I open this particular file, it never gives me the tabs at the bottom. So I actually need to click to a different tab and scroll, but those are not appearing, and it probably won't appear when you open it either. To get those tabs to show up, if you click on File, Options, Advanced, and then you scroll down to Display, actually display options for this worksheet, and turn on Show Sheet tabs, and I'm going to show the vertical and horizontal scroll bars too. I'm not sure why it keeps turning those off. I didn't tell it to do that, but that's what it's doing. So now, even though it's not showing on the screen, I can click between my tabs at the bottom. Here is the graph of all the frontiers, the 2 stock frontiers that it's possible to generate from those 5 different investments. Ignore the red frontier for now. But like here's one frontier, it looks like it's between PFUIX and VIDMX. And here's another frontier that's quite small. And here's a frontier that's essentially straight. That was the one that had the really high correlations. Because remember, when your row is almost 1, or 1, I mean, your frontier will be just a straight line. But what I would like to do is actually graph the frontier for all 5 stocks. Like if I were to include the weight of all 5 stocks in a frontier, what would it look like? Or actually, let me say this. If I wanted to graph the frontier that was as far to the left as possible, that would give me the lowest risk at different return levels. That would be the optimal frontier. I need to do that via a macro. And essentially what that macro is going to do is start at this point right here, go to this point right here, because that's my highest return stock and my lowest return stock, and looking at all the stocks, or funds I mean, and all their correlations, it's going to choose the weighting scheme that will accomplish the lowest standard deviation at any return level between approximately 10% and approximately 2.5%, my highest and my lowest. And it will tell me the weighting scheme that will accomplish those lowest risk or minimum standard deviations. To do that, I click through to my EF tab, which stands for Efficient Frontier. And you don't need to enter any data on this tab. All the data is pulled from the other tab. I've got links for everything. So it's just pulling everything from your Frontiers tab. So Basically, here's my expected return of standard deviation of a portfolio formula. It is the sum of all these co-movement terms and these individual risk terms. To run your macro, click on your developer toolbar, and if your developer toolbar is not on, if you click on File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and look over here in this section, just put a check by the developer toolbar to turn it on. So go to your developer toolbar and macros, and then click on the Solver Run macro. And click Run. And what it's doing is starting at the highest return stock, running Solver, figuring out the weights that will minimize that standard deviation. Then it increments the return by, I think, 0.1%. And so it goes to the next lowest return. Runs Solver again, finds the weight that will minimize the standard deviation at that return level. Then it increments the return by 0.1% again, and just does it again and again and again until it actually it starts with the lowest return and goes to the highest return. Ignore this 20% weight in each. Technically, this should be 100% in the highest return stock. I was having some programming issues, and that was my solution. I don't even want to talk about it. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. Now I'm going to go back to my Frontiers tab, and I don't know if you briefly saw that old red Frontier, but it has redrawn my new red Frontier to show me the furthest left I could possibly get with these 5 funds. And starting at this point right here, where it's the lowest risk, and down to the right, that's an inefficient weighting scheme. It looks to me like the best weighting scheme for me might be right here, which would be to earn approximately 8% at a standard deviation of somewhat less than 5%. So what I'm going to do is pop over to my EF tab, start looking at this efficient frontier, expected return column, and find the one that says 8% with the standard deviation of 3.8%. So that looks like it might be a good weighting scheme for me to follow. And here are the weights. I should put 86.83% in the VTHRX fund and 13.17% in the VIDMX fund. And it's saying that based on their correlations and their historical returns and risk levels, it really doesn't behoove me to put any in these 3 funds. So that might be one way that I could allocate my funds in my retirement account.